nice to see you. So this afternoon, and I'll be going back and forward to find you guys. This afternoon we'll spend a little bit of time just talking through some ideas for, you don't have to shift, you've got a nice comfortable spot there. Oh, and it's even more comfortable there. Oh, thank you, that's very kind of you. We're just going to talk through some ideas for how we go about family worship. But it's a little bit more than that, because family worship's only part of the whole thing. Let me say a prayer, then we'll walk you through what we're going to do for the next little bit of time. To Lord, to come to you now, we're going to be mindful of your presence, and now we just think about the kids running around this campground, and I thank you for the people who are putting effort into showing pictures of you to them. Just pray for the people who are thinking through ways that they can go about showing a picture of God to children. We thank you for the people here this afternoon, and may the time we spend together not just be about ideas, make a difference in the way we go about being your hands and your voice and your feet. Amen. So what you don't need is to be told more things you have to do. Because if you're anything like Amanda and I, you're living at that sort of capacity and space, and then someone comes along and tells you what else you have to do, and you walk away thinking, oh, now I've got to do this, and something else. And it's easy for Amanda and I to give you some guilt trips, and then we can run away to our dysfunction, and you can run away to your dysfunction, and we can all have this idea of what it could be. But what we do want to do is say, hey, here's some things that we've found work, and for grandparents and for parents, these are some things that we've been thinking through, and things that have worked and things that haven't worked, and we can have a little chat about things that work for you and things that you've discovered as well. First of all, I want to start off, if I just grab my Bible. Sorry about that, it went hiding into the bottom of the bag. Let me tell you why I've got such a small Bible, by the way. So I have this little Bible, and my mother-in-law bought this little Bible for me when I started pastoring at Papatoe Church, because I used to preach out of a big Bible. And when I was preaching, I sometimes used my arms. And there was a lady sitting about there, and she got a big Bible. Unfortunately, that lady, her name's Gloria, it was only a month or two after that event that when I'm talking to church members in the foyer after the sermon, I also use my hands. And I'm blind in this eye, by the way. So blind since birth in that eye, I can't see out of that side. And so I was waving my arms around, and she came walking up on that side of me, and the same lady got knocked over by the Bible again. So my mother-in-law chose to get this Bible for me. So that's why I have such a small Bible, and I'm sort of looking, what's going on here? So I want to start off in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Because some of you know this part. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says, love the Lord your God. These are the commands and decrees and the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing to. So this is, they're about to go into the promised land. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, God's saying, hey, here's what I want you to do. He's saying to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. But then he's saying, pass these laws on from generation to generation. And he tells you when this happens. Verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you what? It says talk about them when you rise. Talk about them when you walk along the road. Talk about them when you sit down to eat. And talk about them when you lay down to sleep. So it gives a different picture that oftentimes we think of, hey, family worship is that event, or family worship is this event. However, most of the conversations that are going to be significant happen when? In the normal run of life. And sometimes we've got to be alert for those sort of conversation moments. So conversations when you rise, and this is Deuteronomy continues to talk about the type of conversations, but it says this is how you pass on faith from one generation to the next. So when a child wakes up, what usually happens? They find a screen, yep, and they attach to something or someone to start their day. What's it look like for a conversation to happen at that point? Now, as one of the things Amanda and I notice, as you get teenagers, especially on Sunday mornings, as they wake up, that can be getting closer to lunchtime now, where it used to be very early when they were tiny. And when they're tiny, you look forward to the time when they're going to stay in bed, hey? So different seasons of life give different opportunities as well. And so what works in one season of life is going to be different for another. And what works in Amanda's and my house is going to be different in yours. So what we don't want to do today is say, this is how you have to do it, because, hey, we find some ideas and we can chat together about that. As you rise, as you walk along the road, how often do you walk along the road? What about when you're driving? What about when you're driving? What's it look like to pass on faith when you're driving? And what sort of conversations would that generate? What sort of conversations could you have? And what would it look to intentionally make drive time a pass on your faith time? So, and Amanda knows which story I'm heading to here. So this is when we're still living in Sydney. So this is 6 or 7 years ago, a bit more. And we've got 3 little boys at that stage. And if you know anything about having 3, it means that you've got 3 of them lined up in the back seat. Unless you invest in a 7-seater and put one over the next row, which makes a lot of peace, by the way. But you've got 3 lined up there. And on ideal days, you're going to be having a nice faith conversation. That's on the ideal day. On most days, you're not. Most days, it's just making sure that you get from this place to that place without any problems, causing any accidents. And most times it's, Brad, you just sit still, you look out that window and don't look at James. James, you're in the middle. I want to be on the edge. You're not on the edge. You're the littlest one. You're in the middle. You just look out the front. Don't look at Brad. Don't look at Ben. Don't touch them. Don't look. See that line there? That's your border. Don't go over that. And then driving along, Ben, why were you doing that? Why were you tickling him? So, and it gets, on those days when it gets a little bit frustrating and when you don't have as many fruits of the Spirit as you wish you would have, and the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control are getting a little bit thin. And this particular day, it was getting a little bit thin, and I'm starting to tell off the boys, and it's all getting more and more intense. And Amanda says to me, she goes, what about that drive time stuff we talk about when we do the workshops? We're doing children's ministries in Sydney. And so she turns around to the kids and she says, what happens when you die? Now, whether they thought that was a threat, but it changed. And all of a sudden we're having a conversation about one of our boys. He had a little Indian boy in his class who believed in reincarnation, so we're talking about that. We're talking about heaven. We're talking about what you look forward to in heaven. And it changed. Now, it doesn't happen every time, by the way, and there's still days where the dysfunction's there. As I say, we've discovered that if you put one further back, solves the problem. At the moment, when we got them starting doing their license, it makes a big difference, because then we've got one in the front and everyone's praying. And Amanda's in the back, and we're all praying flat out for the one that's driving. That really does help you spiritually, doesn't it, when you've got one you're trying to teach how to drive. So when you drive, when you sit down to eat, we're going to get Amanda to talk about that one, the when you sit down to eat part, one of the things that we changed.
Well, like most parents, there's a husband that turns up quite late, and when your children are little, you give them their meal earlier. So like that 5 o'clock, they're starting to run around your feet going, well, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. So initially when they were smaller, I used to have these 2 tables as it was, because the other one was too small. And I'd line those 2 tables up, you pop the wiggles on, you put their meal in front of you, and then you walk past and spoon them a few spoonfuls as you walk past. And then by the time your husband comes home, you get to actually sit down and enjoy a meal with him. And so we were doing it that way for quite a while. And then they were getting a bit older. I think our youngest one was about 3, and it was almost time for him to get out of his high chair. And I said to Brendan, I think it's time we got a table. I think it's time we sat up at a table and we all eat our meal together. And so Brendan committed to trying to be home a little bit earlier, and we stretched the boys out a little bit later and gave them a snack in the afternoon of some fruit if they got hungry. And so we decided we would do this, and it was the day before we'd got our table delivered, and it was actually my birthday, and Brendan and I were going out for dinner, and my sister-in-law and brother had come over to babysit the children for us. And we thought, well, tomorrow night we'll set up the table. Anyway, the youngest boy, who was still sitting in his high chair, managed to wiggle his way out of the seat, sit up on the back of the high chair, and Ruth, my sister-in-law, went, no, and I turned around just as the boy tipped over the back of the high chair, landed on the ground, and his head on the tiles. You know how that goes. Anyway, I was like, bad parenting 101. So we ended up down at the emergency room for my birthday, and they felt the back of his head, and they said, oh, it's all right, I think you'll be fine. So we stayed down there for about 3 hours, and then we came home, and what do you do left then? Well, we set up the table that we had bought. So we put the table all together, and then the next day we thought, right, we're going to make a start on this. So I said to the children, here you go. Everyone's going to sit down around the table, and we're going to have a nice meal together. Great idea, wasn't it? Anyway, I think James was the first one to throw food across the table because he thought that would be fun. And I was like, no, James, sit down. And then he stands up on the chair and starts sort of feeding himself while standing up. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I left this way too late. Anyway, it was a disaster. Eventually everyone got fed and we cleaned up the mess on the table. Nothing really ended up on the floor, but that was still quite an experience. Anyway, we thought, I never want to do this again. But then you kind of need to. And after a little while of getting them to sit down, it was mainly the youngest one. Funnily, it's often the youngest one that was causing most of the trouble. But the other 2 got into a habit of sitting down, and we all sat down. And after a while, it started to develop conversations, and we started to be able to talk about things. And they developed some interesting little things that they would share. They'd come home and they'd share things that happened. And I found that when we were able to all sit together and eat dinner together, then it gave us an opportunity to talk about our day and talk about what happened. And we have some great conversations now as we sit around the dinner. Fortunately, there's no more food throwing. Everybody seems to have settled down there. Now they're all teenagers. But at the time, it was hard. And I could have gone, do you know what? I think I'll just give up and go back to the Wiggles. But I think that we persevered, and I think it really made a difference.
So there's a whole lot of research, quite apart from Christian research, saying that if you can manage to eat together, it's a really good thing for passing on values. And it talks about how we live in a culture where our stories are getting disconnected. And so we raise a generation who are disconnected from the stories of us. They're disconnected from the stories of their history, from their culture, from their religion. And consumer culture gives them a story. Products create a story for them, but they miss the story of who we are as a family and who we are as a church. And so sitting down to eat, now is it difficult, especially when they're little? Yes. But even if you can do it one time a week, and this is what I used to say when we did workshops with the parents in Sydney, if we can do it one time a week, that's better than no times. And so what I'm saying today is don't go away and think I have to do all this. You just choose one thing. And if you do one thing that makes your home more conducive to spiritual growth, then that's a wonderful thing. And maybe that is, we'll have tea together. And it makes the time for conversations. Now, as teenagers, by the way, Amanda and I, way back at the start, we went to this parenting seminar because, do you know what? 20 years ago, I could have written a parenting book for you. Now I wouldn't even write a sentence for you. Because 20 years ago, we'd gone to parenting workshops and we'd gone to Parenting Kids God's Way, and Ken and Julie Westlake, they worked at our church and we'd learned lots off them and we were ready to go. But one of the workshops we went to, they talked about when your kids ask questions, answer the question and tell them what the truth of that answer is, and if they ask another one, keep going. If they don't ask, stop. And so that's what we committed to do. And so when the kids asked about, started asking about girls and where babies come from and all those things, we're like, okay. And we'd answer the questions. As you get teenage boys, it's around the dinner table that we have some of the most bizarre conversations. And sometimes as a question gets asked, and I'll look at Amanda, and Amanda will look at me, and I'm like, who's going to answer this? But that's a time when they get to chat. We get to talk about values. We get to talk about why we make the decisions we do. We get to talk about, is this wise, is this not wise? And the boys know that there's a space where at the end of the day, we're all going to sit around and there will be a spot they can talk. So when you wake up, when you walk along the road, when you drive, when you sit down to eat, when you lay down to sleep, this is one of the things Amanda does really well, is she reads to our boys at night time. It's not so much about what she's reading. It's the fact that even our oldest one, who is listening to stories that she's reading to James, it's the fact that they all lie there for a moment and are all together just reading, just imagining. I want to tell you about my mum. My mum's passed away now, but my mum, I'll tell you about what she did every evening. So, she had this idea whereby she would do a Sabbath school lesson, and we'd all do our lesson together. Then I'm one of 6 kids. I'm in the middle, by the way. Then the oldest kids, they would keep doing their homework, and the youngest ones would go to bed. But we'd all sit on our beds to start with. So we'd all go to our beds. She'd say a prayer for each of us. And then, as I say, the older ones would go back to homework, and the younger ones would stay. So this is how it works. I'm one of 6 kids, 5 boys, 1 girl. And we had nothing, but we had a lot of fun. We grew up on the Murray River out in Mildura. So there's 2 bedrooms, 5 boys in 1 bedroom, and my sister in a bedroom by herself. So on this side of the room, we had a triple bunk. On that side of the room, 2 beds, double bunk. So up in this one is my brother Lauren. Some of you may have met my brother Lauren. He's currently a pastor in Perth, but he was for the last 16 years at a church called North Point in Melbourne, where they did 900 food parcels a week, by the way, but that's a whole other story. And so she would say, and the same prayer every night, it'd be, Dear Lord, help Lauren to remember that life is not about him, that he exists for your glory. And then she would say a prayer for Lauren about the things going on in his life. And the rest of us kids would hear Lauren's prayer. Help Lauren remember that life's not about him, he exists for your glory. Then she'd go to my next brother, who was in the middle there. Some of you might know my brother Darren. He has been to camping before. He does balloon twisting. He's the children's ministries guy from North New South Wales Conference. And so it'd be help Darren to remember that life's not about him. He exists for your glory. And then it'd be prayer for Darren. Then there's my youngest brother. He was down the very bottom of that one. His name's Greg. I'm not sure if anyone knows Greg. Greg's a pastor in the South Queensland Conference. He's personal ministries director for South Queensland. Help Greg to remember that life is not about him. He exists for your glory. Then there'd be prayer for Greg. Then I come across to my next brother, my brother Ray. He's the one who's not a pastor. He claims he's the only normal one left in the family, and he could well be right. But it's help Ray to remember that life's not about him. He exists for your glory. And then it was my prayer, because I was on the top of that one. Help Brendan to remember life's not about him. He exists for your glory. And that happened every single night. And whether it's brainwashing or not, if you hear that sentence repeated 5 times a night, every night, it starts getting in your head, hey, help Brendan to remember that life's not about him. He exists for your glory. And so that's a little sentence that my mum used every night at bedtime. So it's as you wake up, as you go along the road, as you eat, as you lay down to sleep. As we lay down to sleep, that was the sentence that my mum would say. You'll develop your own little rituals. But all I'm trying to say is, if you do the Deuteronomy 6 way of going about it, It's in the ordinary, everyday moments of life. That's where faith gets passed on. That's not to say don't do things that are significant, like family worship. We'll talk about some of that. But it's in the ordinary, everyday moments of life it happens. Friday night gives a special option to do things. And Amanda was the one who puts the effort in for our Friday nights. And Amanda, Friday night at our place?
Well, when I was a little girl, my parents always had candles on Friday night. It was always soup, a chocolate bar for dessert for a special, and some buns, and there would be a little candlestick in the middle. And we'd light the candles and we'd all sit around and have dinner together. And then we'd all get a special, usually a pinky bar or something like that, for those of you who have been to New Zealand, something special that you didn't get during the week. And there would also be a little glass of something special to drink. Back in my day when I was young, how fizzy drinks were only for the weekend. So she'd open it and she'd give us all like half a cup each, because you don't want too much sugar in your children. So half a cup each, and then we'd have clink our glasses together, and we would celebrate Sabbath and Sabbath arriving. And then we usually would open Sabbath after that, and then we would all sit around and talk on a Friday evening. So I thought that it would be really cool if we could do something similar in our own family. So Brendan went off and he surprised me with a menorah that he went into the Jewish store in Sydney and bought. And we came home, so we had 7 candlesticks, plus the 2 on the end. And so we put that up every Friday night, and we'd put all the candlesticks in, and the children would say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and there's one that sort of sticks out off the end, and so that was the special Sabbath candle. So we'd go through the days of the week, which was a handy thing to do because it taught them the days of the week as well, and then we would leave that burning while we ate our dinner, and then have our special treat at the end, and then we'd go and open Sabbath. And it was just nice to have a little ritual that we did that was just special for Sabbath. And I remember one night, one of our sons was invited for a sleepover on a Friday evening. And we said it was to another Adventist family, so they were going to have the same sort of environment as we did. But he said, "Mum, I don't want to go." And I said, "Why?" He says, "I don't want to miss out on candles." So sometimes we think, we're just doing these things and going through the motions, but I think they really make a difference. And the little things that we do are the things that children will remember, because my sister and I still reminisce about Friday nights, and that's when we miss our parents the most, when we're all living far away from each other, and that's when we wish to see them the most because of our Friday evenings.
It does mean you have to be intentional about it. But we get the opportunity to, Friday night, it's meant to be, let's take a break from it all. So now on a Friday night, the kids are older, but it's still, let's sit around and we still share highlight of the week, and everyone talks about what was their highlight of the week, what's the thing that most mattered to them, what worked, what didn't work. We do a review of the week and we chat through that as a family this week. This is what happened, this is what we did. And we'll talk about what happened during the week, chat about that. The other thing we do that I think works well for our teenage boys is we chat through things out of the news. And so I will keep looking out for different things in the newspapers, and I'll grab stories from the news. And then on Friday nights, a perfect opportunity to sit and chat about, hey, what do you think that means? Or what do you think that tells us about people? Or what do you think Jesus would say to that situation? Or what's right or wrong there? With the idea being to try and get our kids realising that their faith makes a difference in how they see the world. And their faith makes a difference in how they interact with other people. And so it's trying to say, hey, you've got a faith that's not just what you do on Sabbath. It makes a difference in how you treat other people, how you think about other people, how you approach other people. So we do that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, those who were here yesterday, I think it's only a couple of us, is we talked about, and Rob, is this, I've got to turn on here, hey. There we go. We talked yesterday, maybe I need to step back here a little bit. No, that's okay. We talked yesterday about how all of us relate to God differently. And all of us have different ways that we primarily connect with God. and whether that was intellectual. And so our boy Ben, he'd be that kind of kid. So we'd have something that's going to try and challenge him, and we'll talk about all kinds of theological things. And so we think, how do we make sure we're challenging Ben? Some kids are relational. James is serving, so we've got to think, well, what do we do? It's actually doing something. Brad's creation. And so for a long time, we had a planet of the week, and we'd sit and chat about a planet. But each of your kids is going to do it differently. And each of your children is going to engage differently with different things. And so, for each of our children, you've got to think, what's going to connect with them? And we've taught them about these connection points as well. We've taught them about, hey, there's different ways that you connect. And so our boys can say, hey, I connect with God this way. And so we'll make sure there's things that work to connect them in that particular way. What about family worship then? Well, that can be a bit chaotic, hey? And if it's anything like our house at the moment, you've got Brad, who's always sitting ready for family worship. He's very organised, and he's always ready to... He's just finished school, but he was always ready, and he's sitting there ready for family worship before they head off to school. You've got Ben, who comes into family worship, half shirt in, half shirt out. His bag's a mess, everything's a mess. He hasn't done his hair, but he's there. And we've got James, who's always not there. And James actually staggers me sometimes, because I will even go, hey, James, I'll help you make your bed, and let's get this done. The man does the same thing. Let's get that done. And then you'll walk off and do something else. And you'll come back and there's been no progress whatsoever. Nothing has changed. And a few weeks ago, well, it was a couple of months ago now, I said, James, what have you been doing all this time? You're going to be late for worship again, and you've done nothing. What have you been doing? And his answer was, I've just been sitting watching fat pigeons. And I'm like, watching fat pigeons? His room looks out across the chook cage, and his pigeons try and get the chook food, and they eat too much chook food, and they sit there too fat. And I'm like, what were you doing watching fat pigeons? And for his priorities obviously weren't the same as my priorities. And his level of intensity to get to the bus on time obviously wasn't the same as the level of intensity I had for him. And so our house can be a pretty crazy spot in the morning. And although I'd like to tell you we sit down and have a wonderful time of family worship, sometimes I'm reading our little worship book really fast because the bus is going to be coming really soon. And sometimes it's a prayer and run, but there's still always a space where we'll all sit down together before the day starts, and we pray for what's going to happen in that day for each of us. Our little books, the one we've got at the moment, and I wish I brought them along to show you. I said to a man when we got here, he said, I forgot to bring these books. Because we've got a devotional at the moment that gives really unusual little facts about the world, which the boys are quite into, and then it turns really good little worship. Another time we had a particular book, Devotions for Boys it was called, just a little devotional book for boys that was absolutely remarkable. And the number of times that little devotional book, there was one day Brad was about to go and get braces, and he was quite upset about this. And the devotional book that morning was about a little boy who was going to get braces. And what happened to the boy, and how he's still loved by God, and he's still the same kid. And Brad goes, is that really the one for today? I'm like, that's the one for today. And then when we were thinking about, we got a call to shift from Sydney to Melbourne, and I said to the boys, hey, guys, this is a family thing, and we'll have a talk about it, we'll have a think about it, and if we're all in for this, great. If we're not, that's fine, we don't have to go. And we read our worship book, and it was about this boy who shifted to a new town, and it said there were scary things, and this boy had no friends at the start, but he made friends, and it was quite an adventure, and you're sitting there reading thinking, is that really today's one? And the number of times that happened was quite remarkable. That there'd be just a would link really closely to what was happening. So that's what happens in the morning. We try and make a space where at least, even if it is chaotic, even if it is rushed, we try and make a space where for just that moment we're all on the same page. Now, the other reality is it takes more than just you. And this is where ideally you end up in a network, because the Think Orange ideas, there was a whole movement a little while back called Think Orange, which talked about church being the light of the world being yellow, home is where the heart is, that's red. If you mix the yellow and the red together, what do you get? You get orange. And so it's church and home working together. The other reality is, let me illustrate it like this. If I had a plant right here, let's say I had a pot plant. So I've got the pot plant, and let's say I took the plant out of its pot. So there I'm holding my plant, and there's the pot. What's going to happen to that plant? It's going to die. So what about if I pour some water on that plant? Still going to die? So what about if I read a book that says I need to go and get some sea salt and put into the water and put that on my plant? What about if I go and get a bigger watering can? Still going to die? I think you get the point, that it needs to be back in the soil, hey? Home's the soil, and church is a watering can. If I just had my plant in the soil and no watering can, what's going to happen? It's still going to die. Now, I know that it's oversimplified, and for some people and some kids who will get entrusted to our congregations where they're not going to get soil at home, we have to be both for that. But for the most part, it's when home and church are working together that things work out best. And so we can't just say to the church, solve my kids' problems, or we can't just contract it out to someone else. Creating that sort of soil for our children to thrive in is important. But at the same time, having them involved in the church community is also ideal. And trying to get those intergenerational connections. I've got a slide that Amanda's going to walk you through. That when Amanda was working in children's ministries with Julie Westlake, they worked on Faith Shaper and some experiences that every child needs to grow in faith.
Okay. Want to put the slide up? Nope, that's not the one.
It's going well, thanks, Robbie. Oh. Let me just get this slide because that'll show us what we're going to be doing. That's yesterday's one. I must be giving you the wrong one, Robbie.
Well, shaping is an acronym, at the very least, that we put together as a children's ministries group. And the first one is, there it is service and mission. So when you're wanting to build faith in your children, we decided that we needed to use service and mission as one of the things, an outward focus to allow children an opportunity to participate. Because it's a lot of children feel like they go along to church and they have their Sabbath school and they sit through church and then they go home, but they need to be involved in order to feel part of the church family. So to do some kind of active service and mission, especially for kids who are service oriented, like for example, my son James today, I said, what are you looking forward to most about today? And he said, coming and helping Tina pack up after she finishes with the ABC. And that's what he was looking forward to doing. And then at the end of it, he thanked her for letting him help. So just giving children an opportunity to help is something that's really that works really well. So, and these are also things that they will remember later on in life. And at the end of every week on a Friday, we always go, what was your highlight of the week? And I'm pretty certain that James will come out and he will say serving in the ABC for the week and helping Tina to sell the books. The second one is H. Oh, where did it go? Home. Oh, good, yeah. Home. Home's empowered. I'm not very good at remembering these acronyms off the top of my head. It seems like there's so many acronyms people hit you with, and it's like, so there's Home's empowered, doing activities in your home, you know, the going to work, the walking along the road, and all those things. They're the home's things. Then there's authentic relationships. Some of the studies say that you need somebody in your child's life apart from you that is caring about them and their spiritual growth. So in order to find somebody who helps to build that authentic relationship. And then there's participation, being able to participate in the church activities. In some churches, they have a program where they have an older person being helped by a younger person so that they can serve doing activities actually in the church. So sometimes they get to help collect their offering, or sometimes they just help the deacons around the church or help make the unleavened bread and things like that. Different opportunities for the kids to participate in the workings of the actual church. And then intergenerational connections. Those are when older people and younger people get to do activities and things together. It's funny, we were watching a show on TV a while ago about an old folks home and a kindergarten who came across and joined the old folks with their activities that they were doing. And the children had a wonderful time because they got to connect with the older people, and they measured the levels of depression in the home before and afterwards, and found that having the children come in, even though some of the older people didn't sort of interact really that close with them, it lifted their levels and gave them more satisfaction in their lives, just being connected with the older as well as the younger. So having a connection with older and young people is good for everybody. Noteworthy memory events. Well, we're at one right now, aren't we? Camp. Who remembers camp from when they were children? I loved camp. And where we lived, we only went to camp every other year as well. And I just looked forward to it so much, especially being from a small country town, because we'd get to come in and associate with all these other people that throughout the year there was just a few of us together, and then we'd get an opportunity to have worship together and do activities together and go on events together around the local area. And it was so much fun, and these are the things that we can have an opportunity to remember, and it's really, really special. And the last one is God encounters. Brendan mentioned the worships that we did through looking at out of space. And we would read through the book all about out of space, and then we'd go outside sometimes on a night that was clear, which is not often in Melbourne. And you'd look up at the sky and you'd be able to see the stars. And when Brendan took Ben out to Central Australia, Ben was really excited to see the real bright stars that were out there, and these little noteworthy things, these things that are important, these chances to encounter God. When we address all these areas, it gives the children things that help connect them closer to God and the family.
The other side of serving, Gary Hopkins, who's an Adventist guy at Loma Linda, he traced a bunch of children who served in an old age home. So go from the other angle, and he's traced them for near on 30 years now, well over 30 years. And he's found that kids who served in the old age home were more likely to stay married, less likely to get involved in at-risk behaviour, and less likely, to be driven by consumer values, is what he wrote. Why? Because he says our culture has a way of disconnecting generations from each other. And our culture has a way of, that age group watches that television show. Well, these days, young people don't even watch television. It's all on their YouTube. But he has a way of disconnecting. And his writes, we've got to actively think of how we can put people back in the same space. As an Adventist church, guess where that happens? Church. Church is the important thing, and it means whoever you are, you've got a huge role to play in the lives of the children in your church. And you can make a huge difference in being the people who are outside of family, because every kid needs someone who cares about them who doesn't have to care. If you can get someone who cares about your kid who doesn't have to care, then that's a wonderful thing happening. The other thing that we find useful is on Friday nights we sit there and has anyone seen, I think we mentioned a table talk tin? Hard to find these days. The ABCs used to have them, they've run out of them. Amanda put them together. But they no longer, we need to make another one. We keep saying how we need to make one for teenage boys because that one was made for kids. It's just a box of cards, of questions. And it's even on a Friday night now, we'll grab the card out and it'll just say a question. We'll ask about serving or growing or connecting or sharing or worshipping. It's grouped into those 5 areas. And it'll give a question and it just gives you a conversation starter. And so it's a really good little way just to, it'll say, hey, I find it hard to forgive people who, or I felt sad when, and you just find out things about your kids and things about each other in these conversations that you otherwise might not have. So the little card gives you an opportunity to ask a question that you might not otherwise ask. However, we're all playing the same game here. Have any of you got a tip that you think, this is my one tip that I learnt from my home or that I would share to someone else? Some of you have been playing this game a lot longer than we've been playing it for. Has anyone got, hey, this is something that I think works, or this is a resource I've seen, this is something that our family does? You don't have to come up the front, I'll come to you with a mic and we can share it.
It's not so probably much a tip as advice, but as our girls grew older and couple went off to Avondale and had to make choices for God at that time, but that there were things that they wanted to do and go to, and they'd come and say, oh, Mum, we want to go to this party or we want to go to this event. And we'd say, no, that's not an appropriate event, you're not going. And there were quite a few tears, but years later, they said, we're really thankful that you didn't let us go because they knew what they were getting into, but we had to say no. So I think we do have to make the hard calls sometimes.
And some of that's just being a wise guide. And you earn the right to have conversations with a 16-year-old when you sit in the sand as a 6-year-old. And so as a little child, that's when you're earning the right to have those conversations. And so you're having those conversations is important. Any other ideas? Yep.
It's not the same topic. Something that I've found, my husband sometimes leaves super early or super late in the morning, and our kids come to us. We don't have screens in the morning, and so to have their worship book by our bed, because that's where they end up straight away. Because if they start, or somebody, as soon as you get up, it's kind of lost and you forget. So yeah, as soon as they come in, everyone's awake because I've jumped on you. We do worship straight away. Sets the mood.
That's a great idea. Start with worship, make it the first thing. As I say, different seasons of life have different opportunities. One of the things that, and as I say, I think very highly of my mum, the stories, those of you coming to family worship, the pioneer stories. My mum would find pioneer stories and she would just tell us kids stories about pioneers, stories about people doing amazing things, stories about people serving God, and it was all around her bed. You talk to my brothers, my sister, and I remember times just sitting around the bed, 6 kids, and sitting around the bed, and she would be telling us the tract on the picket fence. She told us that story over and over and over. So telling those stories is really important, for sure. Any other ideas that you go, here's a tip worth sharing?
This one my wife has made up. Instead of playing I Spy in the car, and when there's, fights and stuff going on with little kids, we play I'm Glad Because, and then they have to fill in the rest. And it just goes around and round and round and round.
That's a great idea. I'm glad because I'll try that one. Down this way.
I found personally opening up communication around the dinner table with the best and worst of the day. I actually picked it up from the job sites.
Yeah, the family meal thing is a big deal. And if, as I say, if you can make that work, if you can just do it one more time than you do currently, that makes a big difference. Now, keeping in mind also that what we're talking about increases the likelihood of your children growing in faith. It doesn't guarantee it. And as we see in the Garden of Eden, God gives us choice. And Adam and Eve made choices. I talked to you about my family, where they're all pastors apart from one. He doesn't attend church, grew up in exactly the same home. Really good bloke, by the way. Don't tell my other pastor brothers, but he's my favourite brother. Really good bloke. But he's made a different choice. It's never the end of the story, or not at this point. And so at the same time, if you're someone whose child has made a different choice, then guess what? One of the things that my mum did really well, and as I say, she's passed away now, but all of us kids knew we were loved. Even the one who wasn't attending church still knew he was incredibly loved, and my mum could still have really good conversations with him. And so it doesn't guarantee it's going to work, but it does give the likelihood of passing on faith from one generation to the next. Any other ideas before we call it done for the day? And by the way, I admire you very much for coming to workshop at this time of a Friday afternoon. Good on you, by the way. And just different resources you can try and get. There's a whole bunch of different resources. And as Amanda said, we probably should have done this workshop first so we could have mentioned what was in Tina's ABC store, because she had little daily bites, which Amanda did some work on that. So lots of different resources of worship. These books, and not just because it's Amanda who wrote the book, but these books have discussion questions in the back that are for family worship, so you can read a story, go through some questions. So to get this book, can anyone tell me the different ways we connect with God? And your kids are going to connect with God on these ways, some stronger, some other ways. See, this is an advantage for people who came yesterday, because yesterday we talked about this for a long time. Well, if you can give me one, you're doing better than everyone else. Intellectual. Take his. You got intellectual already. You got creation serving. Well, if you wrote it down, that's great. You can have the book. Yep, there you go. That's good enough. Contemplative, serving, intellectual, worship, and what was the last one? Creation. I might have said one twice. Anyway, in the end, we see these pictures of the ideal home. Amanda and I don't have that. But, as I say, if you can do one thing more effectively this week than what you did last week, you won't jump to there, but even if you move to there, even if you can take one stepping stone further and make a more conducive space for your family to experience God, then that's a great thing. When you wake up, when you walk along the road, when you sit down to eat, when they're off to bed, there's moments to share the story of God and moments to share what God's doing in and through us. Let me say a prayer for you, and we'll be done. Lord, as we come to you now, we just want to ask for your guidance and blessing, and you entrust us with these children. May we always remember that they're yours, and we just get to steward them for some time. And we just ask for your wisdom in how we go about this. And some days it feels like it's going really well, and other days we just wonder what we're doing. And we just ask for your guidance, that we allow you to work in and through us. We ask for fruits of the Spirit, especially in those times when when we're tired and it gets stretched really thin. And we ask that we can be pictures of God to our children in our homes, but also the children who are in our church families, that we can go about being people who show them a picture of who you are. We ask that we allow you to work in and through us now. Amen.